getting ready to leave, I want to just part two things with you as you're leaving. That, first of all, it is about time that the Republican Party recognizes that the Constitution Party does not have a monopoly on the Constitution. And second of all, if we're not using the Constitution as our weapon and as our shield or our defense, then we're making big mistakes. So cogitate or ruminate on that as you have to go and meet your other schedules and so forth. But let me just dive into this. The framers used one word, actually two words, that were interchangeable with the Constitution throughout the ratification debates and throughout history, as long as they lived and were documenting their conversations regarding that document. Compact and contract. If you look at the Constitution, Article 7 clearly clarifies the fact that the Constitution is a contract because it required ratification. The definition of ratification back then, as it is today, is the formal process of accepting a contract or a compact. It's that simple. If you understand the ratification debates, and actually let me give you one other fact about the Constitution regarding a contract. In the 7th article, it also points out who the principal stakeholders are. Who had to have buy-in? It required 9 states to buy into this contract for it to have legal force. That right there clarifies who the principal stakeholders are and the fact that this is a contract. Furthermore, in Article 5, it clearly states who has the ultimate sovereignty over anything regarding the Constitution for changes, amendments, or wholesale getting rid of, and that was the states, because Article 5 granted that to the states. It wasn't granted to the Supreme Court, it wasn't granted to the executive, nor the legislatures, who are the sovereigns of the federal government. If you can fathom that, the states literally are the sovereigns over the Constitution. That's why it requires 3/4 of the states to make any changes. Furthermore, as they were going through the ratification, this whole acceptance process of this contract, they demanded uniformly, or should I use unanimously, that every single state asked for the 10th Amendment, which basically clarified the fact that everything that was not delegated, everything that was not delegated within that document was reserved to the states. The 9th Amendment does the same thing. Both of those amendments clarified that the states were sovereign. If you understand those 4 principles within the document itself, then you have to start accepting this fact. That when we talk, anybody creates a contract, and we start talking about that contract, if we clarify that, and let's say John and I are doing a contract, and John's going to be my landscaper, and I ask John to do whatever you need to make my yard the most beautiful yard in the state. I don't care what you have to do, and here's the budget I'm going to give you. I'm a jet setter. I leave for 2 weeks, I come back, and I tell this story, but you may not have heard this before, but I come back and I find all of John's equipment inside my house. I go, hey John, where's my furniture? And John literally says, well, I put it in the back. And I go, well, why'd you do that? He said, you told me to do whatever I needed to do. I literally gave him an open-ended contract. In the ratification process, I'm going to give you 2 examples because Mr. Iredell of North Carolina identified and made a similarity and actually a comparison of the Constitution as a power of attorney. Everybody here understands the power of attorney. Do you know what a general power of attorney is? You sign that and you could be really sorry because you've just granted somebody complete power over everything you have. That's what a general contract is. That's what a general constitution is. And he clarified that we have an enumerated power of attorney or an enumerated constitution. We have literally identified these powers and only these powers. Now, as I was sitting back there listening to everybody's concerns about health care and about SOGI and all of these things, almost every single one of your problems really comes down to the fact that they're not in compliance with the Constitution. If you identify the fact that the Constitution is a contract, than every single public servant who takes an oath. And oh, by the way, I love your oath. To obey, support, and defend. Those three phrases or statements are in your oath. That as a public servant, you basically swear that you are going to support, defend, and obey the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of Wyoming. Now, so way back then in contract law, contracts were literally done, so when John and I would be done, we'd shake our hands and that was it. There was no signing. We didn't have to have any, verifications to prove that that was our signature like we do today, because contract law has really matured a lot since then. But the fact of the matter is, back then they had integrity and honor. There was a time when if you actually violated your word, you'd be going into a duel with somebody, or you impugned their character. They took that stuff very seriously. We've lost that, haven't we? As a matter of fact, nobody takes their word seriously, and nobody takes that oath seriously. That's why I had Marty Halverson, and I had other candidates. Clarence is not here as well, but I had other candidates, even some governor candidates, signing a pledge. And that pledge was literally to call for an audit. Now, I'm going to get into this principle because if your contract is being violated, what do? Well, most people would go to court. Most people would say, well, we are going to have irreconcilable differences, so we need to go to a court. If you understand the limitations within that contract, and I can give you all sorts of citations, but I don't want to make anybody's eyes glaze over. But the fact is that the Constitution limits the Supreme Court's jurisdiction to those things enumerated. Madison even said this very specifically. George Nicholas, I have a whole bunch of lists of names I could give you. But the fact is, they're limited to what is within the enumerated powers of that Constitution. So how does the Supreme Court have any jurisdiction over marriage, abortion, health care, education, energy? I could go on and on and on, because all of these things in our lives that are not within that Constitution, they have no jurisdiction. Do you get this? So who do you go to when your contract is being violated? As Madison said during the ratification debates, who are the parties to the contract? We the people? No. It's we the people of the sovereign states. And oh, by the way, Wyoming has equal footing as Virginia, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, New York, all those original states. But you aren't given equal footing. They're even violating the contract of you coming into the contract. So what do? You got to audit it. You have to call them out and say, where did we give you this authority? Show us in this contract. And they're going to give you all sorts of doublespeak. But it's clear that unless it has been amended in that Constitution, it is unconstitutional. Unless the states granted this annotated Constitution. Has anybody heard of the annotated Constitution? So, unless the states, through an amendment, have allowed the Congress or the legislative branch to maintain and operate an annotated legislation, or a legislative constitution, an annotated constitution, I'm sorry. The whole fact is, unless you grant that to them, they don't have any authority to do it. It has to come through an amendment process. That was clearly stipulated in every single ratification debate that they documented. And believe me, I'm one of those guys that reads through that stuff. I will tell you this. Most Christians understand why they have to read the Scriptures. And they read the Scriptures regularly. Because when they start hearing perversions against doctrines that's within the Scriptures, they can recognize that. How many people have really taken the time to read the founding documents so that we can understand these perversions that we've been living with? And that's the problem. Our education system, our natural resources, and so forth. And so the critical matter is that Wyoming, you are ripe. I mean, you're feeling the pressure, you know everything is wrong, and it's just a matter of really focusing your energy on doing the right thing. You're already going in directions that I'm actually subscribing you go. It's just a matter of one thing. If you're going to have public servants, if you're going to have party members, and you're talking about a pledge, the one thing that they have to do is comply. They have to comply to that oath. If they say that they're going to support, defend, and obey, then they have to pledge that they're going to comply to the Constitution of the United States and comply to the Wyoming Constitution. When you start looking at things like SOGI, that violates the First Amendment. Why would you even consider passing a law that would violate the Constitution? There should be a law, I hate to say this, but there should be a law that if anybody supports or sponsors any type of legislation that violates the Constitution, they should be tried, or actually they should be convicted of trying to subvert the Constitution. Because that's what they're doing. And we're letting them do this. But the whole reason we got into this mess is because nefarious or pernicious people, such as Supreme Court justices, politicians, lawyers, bureaucrats, they started to completely obfuscate this whole thing. It's a living document. Or, no, this necessary and proper clause, this means that we can do anything necessary and proper. This is where the ratification dates come in really handy, because they clarified exactly what that grand sweeping clause of the necessary and proper, the supremacy and so forth. I can give you all sorts of academic evidence, but I don't want to take a lot of your time now. What I believe is, because I've heard it in this room, and I'm so thankful to be here. Thank you, Chairman Ethorn, for letting me come. I should have said that first. I'm just really excited because I'm in a room with patriots that really realize what's going on, and all I've got to do is get away all those little shiny distractions and get one focus in everybody's mind: compliance. It's all about compliance to that Constitution. I could go on and on and on. But what I really want to do is talk about how I can help you in getting there. How can I answer your questions to clarify? Because I know that there's probably lots of real questions about this. I completely, like I said, I have argued with constitutional professors. They can't refute this. They just don't like it. They'd rather see a constitutional convention than an audit, because they know that once you open that audit door, everything that's a Department of Energy, Department of Housing and Urban Development, you name it. The only three constitutional departments they already created: the War Department, which we call the Defense, the State Department, and the Treasury. They didn't amend the Constitution to create the Department of the Interior. As a matter of fact, there's nowhere in the Constitution that allows them to own any state property. Article 1, Section 8, subsection 17 is where they are limited to what property they can own or operate. It's really clear, folks. It's a contract. And with that, if you have any questions, because I could really go on and on and on, and what I want to do, most everybody should have already received, I believe, Chairman Ethorn's email that had my content. In that, I have literally the argument laid out in bullets. It's about 2.5 pages, and I also have a description of how this audit works. If you want to know how this audit works, this is what Jefferson and Madison did. In 1798, when Congress passed a law that infringed upon the freedom of speech, Jefferson audited the Constitution, and he said, nowhere in here did we agree to do this, nowhere in here did you have the authority to do this, and nowhere in here did we say you can violate the contract. And like I said before, in Resolution 8, Jefferson literally called upon his other states to join him. This audit can be done by one state. We don't need 2/3 of the states to apply. And then let's make this very clear. This is not applying for an Article 5 convention. You already have the authority. You don't have to apply to Congress to use your authority. It's almost like asking the Lord to give you your God-given rights. He's already given them to you.
And the precedent set.
Yes. The precedent was set by Jefferson and Madison. The doors have been opened. As a matter of fact, this all stems back to, like I said, the state, when Jefferson wrote his book, the notes on the state of Virginia in 1783, and Madison clarified this in Federalist Paper number 49. He clearly talked about using conventions, and that's a C word that everybody kind of a little touching on, because back then they had conventions for lunch. What are we going to have for lunch? Well, let's get some delegates and decide. Because they were a Republican form of government, they used conventions for everything. But literally, they differentiated in Madison differentiated in Federalist Paper number 49 a convention for amending the Constitution and fixing its deficiencies, and the second part was an enforcement. And that's the key. That's what you're talking about. You're talking about enforcing your contract. What ended up happening, because none of the other states came along, they said, well, we're just going to nullify this and we will not support these laws in these 2 states. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you look at the Leviathan today, nullification is a fly swatter in trying to kill an elephant. But I will also tell you that if Wyoming becomes the David to stand up against Goliath, there are plenty of other Davids that will quickly get the courage as you educate them, because it doesn't take long. I think within this short amount of time, everything what I'm saying is making sense. If you look at videos and you really start detailed research on this, the veracity is there. There's nobody that can close this down, because if you're using the ratification debates, and again, if going back to this contract, I want to give you this example. Let's say I'm going to hire John. I'm going to pick on John. I'm going to hire him to be my employee. And in the contract, he notices that you have to wear headgear. And he notices that at my companies, that everybody wears ball caps. And he says, you know, I noticed that you don't specify that I have to wear a ball cap. I just have to wear a hat, right? And I said, yeah. And so I put that in an email to him. You just have to show up to work with a hat. Any kind of hat, it's okay. He shows up to work with a top hat. My manager at one of my sites says, hey, ho, 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 what are you doing? You got to have a ball cap on. And he says, no, I've been told by the owner that I can wear any hat I want, and this is the only hat I have, so this is what I'm going to wear. And he goes, I'm sorry, I'm firing him. You have to have a ball cap. We have unity, this is what we got to do. He now has legal standing, because even though it wasn't in the contract, we agreed, and as long as there's a witness with an email or any kind of documentation, and do you think it was divine hand of providence that made sure they documented the ratification debates? I can tell you the divine hand of providence is all over the Constitution and everything that we need today to move forward. The question is, are the people in this room and are the people of Wyoming mature enough, and if you excuse the expression, have the cojones to do what needs to be done? Because if not, these blue state conversions and the exigencies that will come soon when Congress, because they've already set aside the Constitution 4 times. Last time was with Nixon, when they allowed Nixon to take control over pricing. Remember when farmers were killing their chickens? He was violating the Constitution, and they had to set it aside, just that part of it. And with Lincoln, they did the same thing. With Wilson and FDR, they did the same thing. They're going to do it again. And this time, it will be set aside for good, because those kids in the education system, the indoctrination system, they're all being trained that we don't even want that thing. That thing is a relic. It doesn't represent us. We want socialism. Bring on the manifesto. Your kids are being weaponized to destroy your liberties, and they have no idea. Lenin talked about useful idiots when he talked about his revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution. Your kids are those useful idiots because they don't know any better. They've completely absorbed all of this information, and they accept it at face value because they don't have providence. What is providence? Wisdom. They don't have the time and experience, and they haven't done the due diligence. So with that, let me just ask you this. Can I have an interchange or questions and answers? Can I get to the real root of what your concerns are at this point in time? Is that okay? All right, go ahead.
Yeah, what were the 3 departments?
Let's get him on mic there.
Yeah, he's got a mic right there.
I know, but he's talking.
Sure.
I just want to make sure it's on the video.
Yeah, what were the 3 departments that you say were original? The War Department, Treasury Department, and the what?
War Department, Treasury, and State.
Oh, State Department.
Because
right.
it's within the Constitution that the President has the authority to establish foreign affairs, emissaries, and so forth, and that's the State Department. They also had the authority with immigration and so forth to be able to maintain and manage passports and so forth. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I have not seen I haven't read the material that was sent out. I haven't seen any videos. So would you walk me through, tell me how an audit works?
Sure.
And how we begin it. I love everything you're telling me. Just tell me how.
So who are the sovereigns within our Republican form of government? Because Wyoming is a Republican form of government, right? Okay, who are your sovereigns? The people are the ultimate sovereigns, but you, in a Republican form of government, that means you have representatives, right? So you have representatives who you've actually delegated sovereignty to rule you, if you want to use that term, or delegate powers to them to basically govern in this state. That is your state legislators. They are the sovereign. They're the ones that make the laws. They're the ones that can oppress you, or they're the ones that can unleash your economy. So they're the ones that actually have to call, and that's why when Jefferson, so this Sedition Act was passed in July, and in October, Kentucky had already responded. Do you think news traveled that fast? It didn't. Jefferson got on his horse as the Vice President of the United States and rode to Kentucky, and I'm telling you, that wasn't a day ride. That took weeks. And he got to Kentucky, and I'm sure as soon as he walked in the door, because they knew him, they said, hey, let's have a beer. Jefferson's here. And Jefferson probably said, shut up, roll up your sleeves, call your wives. You're not going home for a long time because we got some work to do, man. And he literally schooled them on the Constitution, the contract, and how the states had the authority, and got them all on board with signing this resolution calling out to the other states, because that resolution didn't go to the federal government. That resolution, that some people label it as a draft, but it actually was promulgated or sent out to all the other states. Madison was in waiting in Virginia, and in December, Virginia state legislators responded in kind to say, yes, we're on board, we will join this audit. And I'm paraphrasing, but if you look, it'll start jumping out of those two documents. It only takes one state to call upon all the other states to join, and it would be your state legislators. So that's why your conversation today in how to start taking control really excited me, because that's all you've got to do. The party only needs to do three things. Yes, Pepper?
I was just going to say,
Hold on a second.
One question on clarifying that last one.
Yeah.
Is it just the state legislature, or is there a benefit of having the legislature, the governor, and the ATL?
To get it started, you only need your state legislatures. When you want to really start putting teeth into this, and what was sent out is the model. You actually can see the flow chart of how the audit works, and I actually describe each step and what it takes and so forth. So, you know, you got that gratis from your chairman, from the state chair. Go ahead.
A few weeks ago, we had a meeting in Riverton, and we were talking to some legislators, and one of the fellows said, you know, what about our Constitution? We want to, you know, go along the lines of our Constitution. And one of our legislators said, you don't know what you're talking about. We don't have a Constitution anymore. The Constitution is about this thick. It weighs about 3 pounds. And he said it has about 1,700 pages. My question is, if you take that contract and that document, and through legislation, through court decisions, it's been tweaked, can you go back to the beginning, or what do you do?
It's really clear. This is really, really clear, folks. Your state legislators and you as the people, do you accept anything? Well, let's do a test here. How many people have the Constitution on? This is the Constitution with the Declaration of Independence and a couple other documents. This is it. This is your Constitution. You are the sovereigns, and you can replace your state legislators unless they have formally adopted a constitutional amendment, because that's the only way they can surrender their sovereignty and allow the federal government to have a general constitution. That annotated constitution is a general constitution. It means that they have all powers, they can do anything they want to do. And you never signed that amendment. That does not exist. Does that make sense? You're not even forward. They're forward. You basically say, hold it. You can't go there because we never let you. What happens when all of a sudden you find out that you've been, people have been passing laws and making contracts, and everything has been completely legal because they had no authority? It's almost like somebody in your company gets a hold of your checkbook and starts writing checks. It's fraud. They don't have the authority to do that. It's all illegal. Yes.
Yes, do we have any other states that have already moved forward for an audit?
So I believe Wyoming is the leader. I believe the cowboy state will pull the reins and literally, bring all of the rest, rustle them all together, whatever you want to metaphor this. I believe you guys are the leaders. But yes, Idaho does have a state legislator that has signed the petition, and I have actually a couple people in Idaho. I've just really focused on Wyoming. I've also started seeding North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Tennessee, Oklahoma. So I've already started seeding good constitutional people that you get this going, but this is where...
Going to take the red state.
Absolutely. This is a red state issue. I believe the Constitution is in the DNA of red state, red-blooded Republicans. Yes, sir.
Sheridan, in response to her comment, what she was told by the legislator, we had a problem at our high school where they're in violation of the law, and I asked them if I could audit their social studies or their U.S. history book that they teach from. And after looking at it, and I don't even get past the first 5 chapters, I told them they need to throw it in the garbage. But one of the things that it states in there is it talks about, well, we have this many amendments to the Constitution, but formal amendments, and then we have many more informal amendments.
So here's
And
the
so
thing.
what I asked them, I threw the Constitution, I said, please show me the procedure for an informal amendment. There's one way to amend the Constitution, and only one. Yes, 2 ways, but it's in the Constitution, and it's going to have to be voted on by the people. If we don't agree to the amendment, it's not an amendment.
What are the 2 ways?
One, if you
Congress
from
and then the
Congress
states?
or from the convention.
Okay, so there's 3 ways. And I already told you what the other way was. During the ratification debates, when they clarified what this line meant, that is a legal binding amendment to the Constitution. It's a legal binding amendment to the contract. When I told John he could wear any hat he wanted, that was a legally binding amendment to the contract. And he had evidence of that, took me to court and cleaned me out. This is all I got left.
But court decisions and regulations are not amendments to the Constitution.
Correct.
And we can go back to the contract.
It's not in
have
the
a contract.
Correct.
So when they tell you that the Constitution is 3,000 pages long, it's not.
Right, they're lying to you, and if you believe them, then they're winning. You've got to start challenging everything. That's that was my motto in the intelligence community. I spent 30-some years in the intelligence community, and we had to challenge everything that we were looking at because they use deceit and deception in all sorts of things, and you had to challenge, is this what I'm really seeing? Because it doesn't make sense of what everything else I'm seeing. It was the same thing with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The imagery interpreter who actually identified those missiles going in, he was challenging what he was seeing, because everything else he was seeing, was all speaking SA-2 sites. Yes?
Early on, you mentioned that Wyoming had standing similar to New York or Virginia or any of the other original ratifying states.
That's in the Constitution, Article 4, Section 3, correct.
Okay, so one of the things that gets thrown out on the federal lands argument is that the federal government bought the Louisiana Purchase. States like Wyoming were created by the federal government out of land that they purchased, and that the land that's still federal land is a part of the purchase, and they can do with it what they want. That's what's thrown out. With that in mind, how does Wyoming as a state have legal standing in regards to being equal with the original states or not being a fraud itself?
So Madison, when that happened, Madison told Thomas Jefferson that they were violating the Constitution because the federal government does have the ability to possess territories. Those territories were already a part of states. And so there was nowhere in the Constitution that granted them to buy territories. But once they possess the territories, the Constitution does allow them to possess and control territories as Congress saw fit. That's in the Constitution. But when a state applies, whether it be from an existing state or a new state from a territory, it enters into the Union on the exact same footing. That's why all the other territories, because Louisiana Purchase wasn't all of those other areas, right? And so anybody that is clinging on to that Louisiana Purchase, you guys don't have that right, they really don't understand the Constitution, because that is a territory, and the federal government had the ability to manage territories, but once the state has been established, all land is surrendered. And that opens a huge can of worms, and I'm not going to go there, but I'm going to tell you that all land is surrendered. Any other? Yes?
Thank you. The question I have is, how does the state of Wyoming go about declaring that there needs to be an audit?
So I thought I answered that, but because I'm not very clear, and I'm one of the worst communicators, your state legislators need to have a majority to basically create a resolution that they're going to audit the Constitution. All you need is a majority. And then they audit the Constitution. Then they do a promulgation resolution to all the other states on their findings. I can give you, I'd be happy to help in all of this. I really do. I want to roll up my sleeves and get it there. I have a list. It's well over 580. I think it's almost 600 departments, offices, administrations, and so forth and so on that are all these outliers that are part of the federal government. What you have to do as a state is you have to go through, is that what they're doing in this role, responsibility, or power that they've assumed, is this within the enumerated powers of the Constitution? So a case in point is the Department of Education. Is the Department of Education, and is that role, responsibility, or power within the enumerated powers? No, it's not. They do not have any role, responsibility, or power over education. Energy is another one. I can just go on and on, but there's these outliers too, like these little offices for,
Border Patrol.
well, there's the BLM, but those are all falling underneath departments. I'm trying to come up with, like, I think Wilson has a small little office for fine arts or something like that. That's not in the enumerated powers. Every single one of these things has to be challenged, and Wyoming needs to vet it and say, these are all what we found. Prove us wrong. And you literally go out to the other states with this promulgation of identifying all the violations, go, how much more do we have to survive? Because they're killing us with debt, they're killing us with regulations, and all of it's unconstitutional. Does that make sense?
Do you think part of the fear that the states have is the fragmentation of the nation? Once this starts, it's going to open a huge can of worms.
No, so
And
go ahead.
in my mind, that may be a reason that the states won't do it, is because of fear. And I don't think that's something that we should fear, because it's something that has to be done.
Okay, so, no, I don't think so. I don't think that fear will play into it in the red states, especially the western red states that have lost all of their resources. I mean, you're scrapping, for revenues to be able to provide decent government, and the federal government has made that possible because they've taken your resources from you. They've regulated you. You know what's around the corner? It's happened in Washington, California, and some of these other blue, purple states. They're going to take your water rights away from you. They're going to continue to, this is all a part of the agenda.
We've already taken our here.
So, and they don't have the authority. So when you start realizing that the states actually have the superior position in taking over everything that you find essential, and you have your resources, you will actually have a boom. You will find that now all of a sudden, because I know this about Wyoming because I gave this to a couple of governors. Wyoming in 2016 paid 5.5 or something, it's over $5 billion in taxes. They received a little over $2 billion back from the federal government in grants and all these other things. What happened to the $3 billion? I'll bet you Wyomingians would love to have that $3 billion. And if you understand that what they're taking this money for, and what they're spending it on, and what they're giving it back to you on is all unconstitutional. The money they want you to spend it on, they don't have the authority to tell you to do that. I live in a state where they're coming in and giving grants with strings attached to say, we want you to road calm. And in our cities, they're taking a 2-lane each way, so it's a 4-lane road, and they're literally squeezing it down to 2 lanes because they're deliberately trying to change behavior. Go to the US DOT, and they talk about traffic calming, is what they call it. And what they're going to do is they're going to make it hard and make you miserable if you live on the outside of the city, because you have to go through all this traffic calming. They're going to make your commute skyrocket. They're literally taking away your productivity or making you pay with your time and money. And so what they're trying to do is get you to come all into the city and abandon the country. Yes, sir.
Yeah, one of the things I've seen and what the biggest fear that the states have is somewhere down the road there, we got into this where we are dependent on their money, and they tie everything to money. And just give you a real quick story, we had a meeting with DOT one time, and they were talking about their construction projects. And at the end, they all asked if there's any question. I said, okay, let's take this one project that you have, and what would it cost us if we funded it with just state money and didn't accept any federal money on it? And the guy looked at me like I was nuts. And I said, just, I don't expect you to have an exact number, just give me a roundabout. And he said, well, it'll be about this much, after sitting figuring for a few minutes. And I said, well, look at your pie graph. Isn't that exactly how much we're spending of state money anyway? Right. Because the federal money, if we don't take that, that gets us out from underneath Bacon Davis. It gets us out from the environmental stuff. It gets us out from all their strings.
Obamacare.
And the guy looked at me and he says, well, we can't turn down free money. And I said, wait a minute, are you even looking at these numbers? This is already what we're spending. And he says, we can't turn down free money. But they've done that with our DOT. They do it with our education. They do it with every single thing out there. Many years ago, I don't know if you remember, Wyoming was the last state in the country to raise the drinking age to 21. And at the time, they tried to force us with highway funds that we had to do it. And Wyoming told them no.
Right.
And at that time, back in D.C., they were saying, you know, Wyoming's worse than a foreign government. They just won't do what they're told. Well, since that time, we have now become dependent on the federal government for money, and they will bend over backwards. Governor Meade was one of the worst. He did anything to get the federal dollar.
So the thing is that every time federal dollars come in, they come in with strings attached. They tie your hands. And if you recognize the fact that if you don't take that money, the regulations and all the associations go away. Show me in the Constitution you have the authority to enforce any of these bureaucracies that you're putting upon us. Department of Energy, and so forth and so on. I can't talk about it here, but I've actually, I require NDAs and so forth, but I'm telling you, Wyoming could actually lead in energy in ways you're not even aware of. And I'm going to tell you that in doing so, you could actually forge the way to where we could change the paradigm on energy. And I'll give you the paradigm. How many people here pay your cable, they have your phone, even your cell phone? These are all subscriptions, right? You pay by a monthly basis, right? Doesn't matter how many phone calls you make, you pay for the same rate. Your cable company doesn't charge you by how many channels you watch or how many programs, if your TV's on all day. Why? Because they have competition. Your public utilities is a monopoly. And it's not supposed to be profit-making, but I'm telling you, you've got people that are taking money from you and put it in their pockets, and they're sending money overseas on fuel and everything else. You could easily lead the way in making energy coming from electricity become a subscription. Can't answer all the how to do that and so forth because it's really sensitive and I don't want anybody. The reason I go by GR, the reason I had copyrights on things is because I don't want anybody to buy this stuff up to basically hide it, bury it, and keep it from the people that deserve to have this, and this is the American people. There's a study out there that proved that if we tapped this type of energy, that we would have energy that would supply us for well over 100,000 years based on our current growth of energy consumption.
I have a question. So it takes the majority of our representatives to audit the Constitution.
A majority of your...
How do we make them do that?
both representatives. So this is where the.
So do we send a petition? How do we accomplish that?
Right. So Carl, you signed a petition.
Yes, sir.
And in that petition, as a state legislator, he was on the hook to basically educate his fellow state legislators, create a legislation, and bring it up and literally start educating the state legislators that the Constitution of the contract, they're violated, we have every right to audit it, and we've got to call an audit. Push, push, push. And so he was on the hook to do that. Marty was on the hook to do that. Clarence Stiver is on the hook to do that. And he's actually in your state legislator. So you need to help him and help him get that education through. But as a party, you guys have so much power. Who is the employer of politicians? Whose we are? The people know. I'm sorry, do you really believe, how many people in your electorate actually go through the details? Because I already heard it here. Somebody says, who do I vote for? They don't go through the details of these people. We're all dying from the busies. We have so many things tasking in our lives. I don't got time to do that. That's what I pay you to do. Or actually, that's what I believe you're supposed to do, the party. You are the employers. The party here is the employer, because if they've got that Republican label, then they're going to vote for them. That's all they need is to see that R. And then they see a field of R's, they go, oh, just pick one. You know, some people may vote by sexist bias, name bias, or what have you. Some people do that. I'm just telling you that you're the employer. They're literally zoned in on that party, and that's why the Democrats are penetrating you. They know that. And so they have to subvert you by getting their plants in, or what, you know, whatever, if that's what you want to call mean and so forth. But bottom line is you're the employer. And if you start looking at the party as a major corporation, you are an entity. Act like one. Every entity I work for a global company, one of the world's largest companies in the world. And so one of the things we had is we set expectations for our employees. We had strategies. How to take on this market, how to change things in our market space. Well, your market space is politics and law. You need to have a strategy of what you got to do, and you guys are talking about all of this stuff. And I'm just telling you, it's really not that hard. Some of these things, you may have some little obstacles, but I am telling you that you can do this. You can, and you can really do it very quickly. Some laws you want to get changed, and you actually want to change your bylaws and other things. But I would just say this, that if your platform needs a modification, it needs this one modification, that every public servant will comply. Say it with me. Comply. They will comply with the Constitution of the United States. They will comply to the Wyoming Constitution. It's that easy. Have them sign the pledge, they will comply. Make that pledge a resignation pledge as well. If they don't comply, then you hold it against them. They've actually gone against their word of doing that. And you can strip them of that brand and say, in public humiliation, you have failed to the standards and the pledge you've signed, you no longer are worthy of our brand. If you understand this, and branding is really, really important, and I just want to impress upon this. There are two corporate brands that lead in tattoos, and that is a real statement. When somebody actually puts your brand on their body permanently, that's a big statement, right? Harley Davidson and Apple. But you know what? In America, the #1 brand is in tattoos? Patriotism. We the people. How many people have an elephant or a donkey on their body? But they have the Constitution. Think about that. Make your brand the Constitution. Like I said before, the Constitution Party does not have a monopoly on that.
I'm asking a follow-on on what they've been talking about on the other side of the room. If your legislators won't do it,
Right?
is there a way we can do it?
So, yes, you have to vote them out. That's what you have to do. Yes, we have to vote them out. And there's process of doing that. You want to understand some process of doing that? Is it illegal for the Wyoming party to vet prior to the vetting period, prior to the primary? Probably not. You could probably vet. And you could probably actually have a vetting score. And you could make that vetting score very public. without having to even advertise. But if you educate your population, and they go to your website and they actually see, well, how are all these people? Well, I'll bet you anything, based on those vetting scores, your electorate is probably going to go, I'm going to vote for these guys way up here, because they're scoring really good on what the ideals that I hold dear. That's why they're a member of your party. That's why they vote for your party. You don't have to spend money on it, you just have to vet. And you will see, you're going to start purging ranks. Yes, sir.
This boils down, I think, to what I've been talking about as far as the solution to the crossover.
Yeah.
The Republican Party owns all of the Republican trademarks and the materials that they have. In my opinion, just like the state does not allow anyone to use the bucking bronco unless they have permission. The Republican Party at the state level or the federal level has a platform, and they can refuse to support any candidate or allow any candidate to use the Republican trademark in the next election.
Yes, you can even strip them of it if they're sitting on it. And that's what I'm saying. If you really want to make a statement and you actually pursue this coming 2019, bring me down. I'd be happy to help. Go speak to your state legislators. I got 4 fingers on each hand I can poke people in the eyes with. If you go after them and make them aware of their oath, and even if they didn't sign a pledge, and then demand that they sign the pledge if they don't, and they still don't go for this, and they still vote, and they still accept and spend unconstitutional money, and you make this a part of your platform, you can strip them of that Republican label. Does that make sense? Because that's your brand. You have all the legal rights to that. And if they are not living up to your brand, it's the same thing as if, when I worked for this global company and they saw the books that I was writing, and they said, we only have one criteria because they couldn't not let me write these books. They said, you can't go around and speak with, your company label, and you can't have, it has our company name or label, because they didn't want the name or label associated with what I was doing. They had every legal right to do that. The party has every legal right to do that. Making you think, isn't it? You already have, and you are in control. I'm telling you, you are. You are the employer here. Yes, sir. Chairman.
Help us understand by what mechanism you speak of, because legally, we own the trademark that you see on our materials.
Yep.
Okay, and we are a statutory body, but we're not a public body. So help me understand what mechanism, what legalities apply to what you're saying.
So is the Republican label that a politician wears, I'm a Republican, is that your brand?
Yes, it is trademarked by the National Republican Party. The elephant,
Yep.
the GOP,
Yep.
the Republican name is all trademarked separately.
And so you can, as a party, literally go out, and you may not be able to unseat them. That's what you really want to get. You actually want to get to a point where you have the legal ability to actually remove somebody from their seat. That's what you really want, but you have to get those laws in place. Because what happens if all of a sudden somebody abandons their post, whether they go and take a Trump appointment, or whether, the stress, PTSD from too many gavels? The party owns that seat because you've nominated and you have real estate there. And so that seat opens up and you actually vote to submit a replacement until the next election. Is that not correct?
Correct. Through vacancy statutes, that's the party's prerogative to commit a process. And we usually don't get to pick the person, we get to pick 3, and then a different authority gets to pick the one.
Yeah, usually it's either the county commissioners or maybe the governor, but absolutely. They have to draw from what you've recommended. Why? Because you are actually duly elected people of the electorate.
Unless Utah wins their case.
Good point.
Now, when you said laws in place, I'm assuming you were referring to recall statutes such as Colorado has to remove?
To remove, yes. Yeah. So you can, there's ways you can remove by the electorate, but I'm just telling you, you can actually put a law in place where the party actually has the control over that seat, because the electorate voted for that, and they may be, you know, if ever since the laissez fair term, they just, you know, what will be, you know. But you, if you have an affinity for your brand and you want to protect your brand, and somebody is tarnishing your brand, let's say you got a John McCain in there, what do you do? Yes, sir. Hold on.
One thing that we need to look at, and you, since you mentioned John McCain, the Arizona Republican Party censured John McCain because he violated what they wanted. Now,
go ahead.
One thing that people need to understand here, because we got very close to censuring Governor Meade at a state convention, and a lot of people really don't understand that if we censure somebody, you know what, they don't lose their seat over that, they're not losing their job. The only thing that happens is it's a public statement that we are not happy with what they did. But we need to use that.
Right.
And if a legislature or the governor or an elected official does something contrary to what the Republican Party needs to do, we should hold a censure vote, we should censure them, and then we need to do a press release. This person was censured by the Republican Party because of this.
Let me
Forget your bed.
that's a good step. But everybody's heard of the Scarlet Letter, right? You know what the Scarlet Letter is? Somebody had to wear a letter because they did something shameful, and they had to walk around town bearing the shame of that Scarlet Letter. It's the same thing with your R next to their name. You publicly rip that away from them and say they are no longer Republican, they don't represent the Republican Party, they are now completely independent, but that seat is a Republican seat. And that's why you want to get the laws in place to where you can actually, because you own that seat, then you can actually, as PCOs, take action and fill that vacancy with a real Republican. I know, but isn't that half your problem? Right, right. That's what I've been hearing. If you want to know how to get rid of the problem, then you have to target the problem. Go ahead.
There's a Wyoming statute that if an elected official perjures his oath of office, they can no longer, for the rest of their life, hold a public office. So I know you want to keep this out of the courts, but if we were to sue someone for breaking their oath of office,
There you go.
then
But is that a legal process that financial lawyers in court, or can you just?
my understanding is it would have to be a legal process.
Then what I would do is not go after a particular, I would actually petition the court to say, hey, if somebody violates their oath of office, you know, and they take federal money that's unconstitutional.
But they all have.
What's that?
They all have.
Oh, I know, they'd be scared to death, but the court could actually rule in your favor and say, yeah, absolutely, that is defined as a perjury, or what was it?
They perjure their oath of office.
Perjuring their oath of office, and there you go. When the court has ruled, now you can start pulling them out, and then you've already got the real estate to the seats, and your PCOs have a lot of work to do in the next couple months.
The problem with that, though, is that if the courts rule against us, then where are we?
Then you have to start pursuing getting, like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a battle, but there's some other things that can really move and put this thing on steroids. What would happen if Trump came to the red states and said, look, I realize that the Constitution's being completely violated now. I had no idea. We've all been bamboozled by a lot of soothsayers and witchcraft. We've all been under this trance. And so I realize now I do not have the authority to fix this problem. Only you do. And if he came out to the states, the red states, and said, help me, I will protect you and keep my bureaucracy and my thugs off of your back, call the audit and work together to fix this and drain the swamp. Wow. That would be, real leadership in dismantling the Leviathan. It's a good idea. It may be a pipe dream, but I don't think so. And, after listening to Mr. Root last night, I'm going to send him an email. Anything else? I thank you for your time. It's really been an honor. I like to consider myself a Wyomingian. I wanted to move here when we retired twice, but we actually had to move somewhere else because my mother's ailing and her health care and other things don't transfer out of state. So take care, Mom comes first.
Real quick question, there's all places they've thought about this a lot. Where do we start?
Where do we start?
Tell us where we get to start.
Petitions and pledges. Get everybody in the party to start signing these pledges. Party members should sign this pledge. And as a matter of fact, I believe your party members, if you're a precinct captain, you take an oath, right? You should, because you're an elected official. Right? You can actually replace elected officials if it's vacated. You've been duly given that authority. You should. I'm just saying, I'm just throwing some ideas out there. If you're not, then that's something you should, and add the pledge. Carl, if you go to reclaimingtherepublic.org on my petition scripts, I actually have some pledges up there that some of your officials have actually signed. And if you look at that pledge is very myopic. It's about complying to the Constitution and calling for the audit.
Repeat that.
Reclaiming the Republic.org. And if you want to email me, info at that web domain, reclaimingtherepublic.org. I am here to help, and I'm not from the government.